Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Valeriana put a pot of water on the stove. She planned to cook a cheese soup for her 7-year-old son, Matteo. The boy adored it. So that the caring mother decided to treat her beloved son, who had been studying at the junior school, to celebrate the end of another school week. In the oven, she was baking a pizza. A quiet and cozy evening was ahead. They would have dinner with Matteo, then play board games, and stay up watching interesting cartoons, indulging in delicious treats. Friday evenings were truly special, and both Valeriana and Matteo always looked forward to them. Valeriana opened the fridge and scanned the shelves. There was no cheese, the main ingredient in the soup. How could she forget? They had finished the last of it for breakfast. Valeriana simply forgot about it. What a pity it was. She had hoped this evening would be perfect. Moreover, they were out of bread, and there was only a little milk left, not enough for the morning cereal. Well, it seemed she would have to go to the store for groceries. Valeriana glanced out the window. Heavy gray clouds had covered the sky, and for several hours now, a cold drizzle had been falling. There were slush, wind, and unpleasant misty rain. In such weather, she really didn't want to step out of the warm and cozy home, but she had no choice. She had nowhere to escape. Matteo! Valeriana called out from inside the house. She heard quick footsteps in the tiny, narrow corridor, and a big-eyed boy with tousled red hair rushed into the kitchen, looking very cozy in his fluffy, oversized slippers and a soft, brightly colored robe over his pajamas. His hands and nose were painted. It meant that the son was currently busy with some artwork. Valeriana smiled. "I need to go to the store. Will you come with me?" "Well, I don't know. Do you want me to go with you?" Matteo hesitated. Valeriana immediately understood that her son was deeply engrossed in his drawing and didn't want to interrupt. While she would have liked to take a walk with him, it was okay. She would go quickly by herself. "All right, I'll go alone," Valeriana said, ruffling his hair. "Go ahead and draw." "Okay." The boy seemed clearly pleased. "Please buy me popcorn, okay? Make sure it's candy." "Deal," nodded the woman. Matteo hurried to his room, and Valeriana turned off the gas and began to get ready. She still missed the past summer a little. Those 3 months had flown by like a single day. How good and wonderful it had been. Whenever she needed to go to the store or anywhere else, she could simply step out in whatever she was wearing, slip her feet into flip-flops, and that was it. But now she had to dress in a sporty outfit, a jacket, a hat, and boots. Valeriana grabbed the car keys from the shelf, an old one that was starting to rust in some places, but it was hers. It was unbelievable she had spent 3 years driving already. She was a lady driver. She never could have imagined herself driving a car at one point in her life. And indeed, her life took a very cool and unexpected turn. But the changes were for the better. Of course, for a while, Valeriana had a hard time, but those trials only made her stronger. She got out of it, saved herself and her son, and now she was independent, well off, and quite a happy woman. Most of all, Valeriana liked the changes in her own outlook and self-perception. She used to be quiet, modest, and suppressed. She believed that everyone around her knew better how she should have lived. She went with the flow and always obeyed someone, first her parents and teachers, then her husband and boss. All of this led to sad consequences, and Valeriana had to make a choice. How lucky she was that she found the strength not to break or succumb to circumstances. Thanks to her mother-in-law for the support. Valeriana was born into a large, rural family. From an early age, she and her siblings were instilled with specific behavioral norms. Children were expected to help adults a lot with household chores while excelling in their studies and obeying their parents in everything. Any disobedience resulted in punishments, including physical ones. Valeriana received them less often than others, as her character was quiet and submissive, but she was not exempt from encountering her father's belt. Her mother never hit or insulted the children, but she had another way of influencing her sons and daughters. The woman often threatened to report their misbehavior to their father. This was usually enough to make the heirs obedient and quiet. As Valeriana grew older, she tried to justify her parents' behavior. There was poverty, fatigue, and fear for the children. Besides, they were raised the same way, even stricter if one believed the stories her parents told about their own childhoods. Nevertheless, Valeriana always understood that she would treat her own children differently. She wanted to be a friend, to support and protect them, to be someone who brings joy and helps, not someone who scares and punishes for the slightest misdeed. The girl hoped to build more trusting and warm relationships with her own son or daughter than with those in their family. She believed that obedience could be achieved in a different way. Well, she succeeded. Matteo happily shared all his joys and sorrows with her, asked his mother questions, often hugged her, told her how much he loved her, made handmade gifts, and cared for his mother in his own way, pouring her coffee or covering her with a blanket. All these little things made Valeriana genuinely happy and gave her confidence that she was raising her son correctly, but she had a long and difficult journey to achieve such happiness. She had to fight not only with external circumstances, but also with herself. For a long time, Valeriana felt that planning to leave her husband was selfish and foolish behavior. It was very, very difficult to make this decision. She married Sancho quite late, by rural standards. She was already 24 years old at the time. She had graduated from culinary school. Valeriana worked in the local canteen at the dairy plant. She was content with her free life. She had no intention of getting married, especially since there were no suitable candidates for her, but how much longer are you going to wander without being married? Her father asked his daughter more and more often. Look at Nora and Fernanda, your younger sisters. They are already married and raising children. And you? You're still single. Can that be right? It's time, it's high time, her mother agreed, as always, with her authoritative husband. Otherwise, no one will marry you later. Valeriana sighed quietly. She didn't know how to explain to her parents that the prospect of losing her husband didn't scare her at all. Well, if nobody takes her, that's fine. It was even good. But it was pointless to argue with her parents. They were old-fashioned. They cared about keeping up appearances like everyone else. The neighbors' questions about whether one of their older daughters was about to get married caused them emotional discomfort. Her father had found Valeriana a groom. One evening, in a matter-of-fact tone during dinner, he announced that he had already arranged everything with the Vasquez family from the neighboring village. They had a son named Sancho, who was slightly younger than Valeriana, but that was not a big deal. He had recently returned from the army and got a job as a driver at the sawmill. He's a great guy. Her father praised the groom. He is tall, strong, and hard-working. You'll be safe and secure with him, like behind a stone wall. It's true that you'll have to live in the neighboring village. Sancho's parents have built a house there, but that's not a big deal. It's not that far from us. Valeriana realized that arguing was pointless, and she did not want to. She was used to obeying her parents in everything. If they believed it was time for her to get married, then so be it. They knew better. They were adults, wise people. Valeriana still remembered the embarrassment and awkwardness she felt when meeting her groom. It was too formal. One evening, Sancho's parents came to their house, and Sancho himself came too, a tall, slightly hunched young man with a bashful smile and bright blue, lively eyes. He curiously looked at his future bride. Valeriana blushed all over and wished she could disappear through the floor. She felt so embarrassed for some reason. The parents talked among themselves, discussing wedding details, and then sent the young couple to the garden to get acquainted. The bride and groom were standing there awkwardly, not knowing where to start the conversation. The girl couldn't believe that all of this was happening to her. She was being married off to a stranger, as if they were living in the Middle Ages. But on the other hand, she blamed herself for taking so long to make a decision. Her father got tired of waiting for her to shape her own destiny, so he found her a groom. I feel awkward, Sancho finally broke the silence. Valeriana was glad to hear this revelation. It turned out that the young man felt the same way she did. Me too, she admitted. Do you even want it? I mean, get married, you know, Sancho asked. What other options do I have? Valeriana smiled. My father said, it's time, so I should. That's good. It's good that you respect your father. It means you'll make a good wife. At that time, Valeriana took Sancho's words as a compliment and was even pleased. But now, after so many years, she couldn't understand it. How could she have come to terms with all these domestic arrangements? She was already an adult, not some naive young creature, and yet she went along with it. The young couple got married. The wedding was noisy, crowded, with long tables covered in food and lengthy toasts. As expected, the guests drank too much and got into a fight. It was the classic scenario for the wedding. Then Valeriana moved to her husband's house. The newlyweds only got to know each other properly after the wedding. Sancho didn't impress Valeriana very much, but he didn't evoke outright disgust either. That was already good enough. He was handsome, cheerful, hardworking, not picky about food, which was important, and skilled with his hands. Any work he did was exceptional. He was not lazy. He had many friends, and at first, Valeriana considered that a plus. Perhaps her husband was a good person if everyone was drawn to him, but a couple of years into their married life, she discovered the other side of Sancho's friendliness. At gatherings with friends, he was always drinking alcohol. Sancho would return home barely able to stand on his feet, but he was happy. In a jolly mood, he showered his wife with compliments and told her about a happy future. Valeriana found it amusing at first, but it soon became evident that these drinking sessions happened all too often. Sancho allowed himself to indulge even before work, but in the morning after such wild revelry, he couldn't get out of bed and would then call his boss, lying about a sudden illness. Soon, they stopped believing him. Well, it was quite a logical and predictable outcome. Valeriana cautiously and very delicately tried to reason with her husband, telling him that such behavior was dangerous. Not only was Sancho ruining his health, but he might also lose his job, and Valeriana herself was soon going on maternity leave. And what would their family live on then? At first, Sancho swore that such incidents would never happen again, but the same evening, he went off to see his friends again. One day, Valeriana couldn't take it anymore and had a real argument with him. Perhaps the outburst of anger was triggered by hormonal fluctuations typical for pregnant women. At that time, they were already expecting Mateo. Valeriana called her husband an alcoholic, a spineless weakling, and an irresponsible person, among other fitting but unflattering words. At first, Sancho wasn't able to say a word. It was so unlike his calm and gentle wife. Then, Sancho launched a counterattack. His eyes sparkled with rage, and it seemed like he was barely holding back from hitting Valeriana. He called her an old woman since she was 3 years older, a witch, a useless monster. He claimed that he did her a favor by marrying her because nobody else would have taken her. He reminded her that she lived in his house and, essentially, depended on him since her salary from the canteen was meager, while he, as the head of the family, earned good money at the sawmill. At that moment, Valeriana felt intense pain, partly because some of Sancho's words were not far from the truth. She tried to say something in response, but didn't know what to say. Hot tears streamed down her cheeks. "Aren't you going to say something?" Sancho sneered, barely standing on his feet. "Well, then just keep quiet, woman." With that, he walked into the bedroom, collapsed on the bed, and started snoring. That night, Valeriana slept in the living room on a narrow, hard couch. By morning, her back and stomach hurt badly. Sancho continued to drink. Now he did it almost every day. Valeriana was afraid to engage in conversation with her drunken husband after that incident. She tried to talk to him the next morning, to explain how scared she was for their future together, but Sancho didn't see anything wrong with his behavior. "Is it a big deal?" He genuinely wondered. Everyone lives like this, and nothing happens. These words were not far from the truth. Indeed, most of the rural men heavily drank, and Sancho saw nothing wrong with it. Mateo was born, and Valeriana happily embraced motherhood. This helpless little bundle of joy, demanding so much attention and care, somehow made her feel strong, almost invincible. Valeriana believed that the arrival of the baby would influence Sancho, but the first thing he did upon learning about becoming a father was to get drunk. Well, how could he not celebrate such an event? After all, they had a son. After the festive revelry, Sancho, accompanied by a few friends, went out to cause trouble in the streets. The men made noise, scared people, and even smashed a shop window. It was unclear whether they did it intentionally or if it was accidental. In the police station, they couldn't coherently answer the officers' questions. Sancho was given a 15-day sentence and a fine. Additionally, the intoxicated men had to compensate for the damages, paying for the broken window. The news traveled fast in the village. Valeriana learned about it the very next day. One of the nurses told her everything. Of course, she was very upset. Sancho was locked up for 15 days, which meant he would skip work again. How would his boss react to this? Would he forgive the troublesome employee this time, or would he finally fire her husband, as he deserved a long time ago? Valeriana looked at little Mateo, peacefully sleeping in her arms, and feared for his future. How would they live? After all, Sancho was currently the sole breadwinner in the family. She herself couldn't work for a while, considering she had a baby in her arms. At the maternity ward, Valeriana's parents and her in-laws met her. The happy father missed the momentous event. Of course, he was still in jail. Everyone seemed to smile, but there was an underlying sense of unease. 2 weeks flew by unnoticed. Sancho returned home gloomy, disheveled, and silent. He barely glanced at his son, didn't even hug his wife, as if it were just an ordinary matter, having a new family member at home. "I need to get some sleep," he told his wife. "Finally, I'll be on my cozy bed, not those stinky, hard bunks." At that moment, Mateo started crying in the nursery. Sancho wrinkled his nose with disgust. "Quiet him down. I need to rest. I'm going to work tomorrow." Work? Valeriana's heart skipped a beat with joy. It meant he wasn't fired. That good news managed to overshadow her impression of Sancho's more than chilly reaction to their little son. The next morning, Sancho went to the sawmill, but he returned angry and irritated within an hour. "What happened?" Valeriana asked, although she already knew the answer. It was all too obvious. "Why do you even ask?" "The boss fired me. That's what happened. He hired his buddy at my place. It's all about connections, as usual. And now? How will we live?" "Live however you want, that's your problem," he replied sharply and walked out of the house, slamming the door loudly. Valeriana knew he was going to solve his problems in his favorite way. Yet, they took Sancho back again. Valeriana and her mother-in-law went to see the sawmill boss, begging him not to fire the family's sole provider. Looking at Mateo sleeping in Valeriana's arms, the boss shook his head thoughtfully. "I feel sorry for you, Valeriana, and your son too. So, I'll take Sancho back to work, and then what? It will all repeat. It's like a broken record. Why should I keep such an unreliable driver? He's caused so many delays already. All losses. Please, I'm begging you," Valeriana said with tear-filled eyes to the boss, "give him another chance." The very last one, her mother-in-law chimed in. "I'll personally make sure this doesn't happen again." The boss relented, so he hired Sancho again, but with a condition: if there were one more unexcused absence or tardiness, he would be fired immediately. Sancho managed to hold on for a whole week, but then he came home late, almost unconscious, and Valeriana understood it was all over. Of course, they fired Sancho. Now he was home all day, nitpicking at his wife about everything: her cooking, her inability to calm the baby, and the mess everywhere. Yet, he refused to participate in any household chores. And to think that at the beginning of their marriage, he was so hardworking. Valeriana didn't recognize her husband anymore. She couldn't understand what was happening to him. Clarity came from her mother-in-law. "Alcohol is a curse, that's what it is," she said one day, shaking her head sadly. "Sancho used to be kind and hardworking, and now look at what he's become. It's in his genes. His father doesn't drink, but his uncle sure indulged in it, and both grandfathers did too. And in raising our son, my husband and I must have missed something. Probably spoiled him. There's nothing we can do now." As much as she could, Valeriana's mother-in-law helped the young family. She bought groceries and diapers for the baby, treated the couple to pies and pancakes, and took care of Mateo so Valeriana could tidy up or rest. Valeriana was grateful for such support, but her own parents didn't take her complaints about Sancho seriously. "It happens in family life," her father lectured. "A wife should support her husband during tough times, otherwise, what kind of family is it?" Valeriana once mentioned the idea of returning to her parents' home because she was afraid to live with Sancho anymore. He was changing before her eyes. He used to come home drunk, fall asleep on the bed, and sleep until morning. Now, after lying for a couple of hours, he'd get up and start wandering around the house in a semi-conscious state. Just as she had finally put Mateo to sleep by that time, Valeriana couldn't rest. Sancho would slam the fridge doors, clearing its shelves of anything he saw, turn on the gas stove, and then forget to turn it off. He'd watch TV and didn't care that the loud sound disturbed his wife and son's sleep. Initially, Valeriana tried to reason with him, but in his state, Sancho reacted aggressively to every word she said, showering her with insults and threatening to hit her. He didn't really carry out the threats, but it frightened Valeriana very much. She was afraid not of him hitting her, but rather that if she fell asleep, Sancho would start a fire. He might light a cigarette while sitting on the couch or burn something on the gas stove. That's why Valeriana didn't sleep at night. By morning, her husband would be heavily asleep, sometimes right in the living room in front of the TV. At such times, Valeriana could allow herself to doze off on the narrow couch in the nursery, but within an hour or so, Mateo would wake up. Valeriana didn't get enough sleep. She didn't even recognize herself, pale with dark circles under her eyes. Her mother-in-law pitied her, scolded her son, and tried to reason with Sancho, but it didn't help, although Valeriana still appreciated her mother-in-law's support. Time passed, Mateo grew, but nothing changed in Sancho's behavior. He still didn't work, drank every day, and didn't care about his family's fate. He could see perfectly well that even without his salary, no one was starving. Valeriana's parents provided financial help, and everything was fine. The young man made no efforts to think about the future, living day by day, showing little interest in his son. Mateo's first steps and his babbling didn't touch his heart, but the child's nighttime crying irritated him greatly. He yelled at his wife and ordered her to shut up that crybaby. Valeriana's life during that period was simply unbearable: constant sleep deprivation, hunger, fear for the future, humiliation, and insults from her husband, and anxiety for her son. She didn't know how such an atmosphere in the house would affect Mateo. He was growing up and starting to understand many things. The little one was already afraid of his father and had learned to sense the unreliable parent's mood. If Sancho returned home in an aggressive state, the child would hide under the bed or in the closet. Valeriana's heart ached with pity for her little son. Sancho had transformed very quickly from a cute and smiling young man into a disheveled and unkempt individual. A strong smell of alcohol emanated from him most of the time. He didn't care about his appearance and could wear the same shirt and pants for weeks. It was pointless to offer him clean clothes. He would get angry, insult her, pound the table with his fist, and demand that she left him alone and stop lecturing him about life. Valeriana attempted to reach out to her parents several times, but they blamed their daughter for everything. "You couldn't build a family with your husband, now deal with the consequences," her father said. "Try to be more affectionate with him, dear," insisted her mother. "Love and kindness can work wonders, you know." At some point, Valeriana realized that it was futile. Her parents considered her an independent person and cut off from them. They made her marry that man and calmed down. She certainly couldn't expect any support from them. However, her mother-in-law felt deep sympathy for her. When Matteo grew a little older, she suggested Valeriana go back to work. It was something she really wanted to be back in the workforce, receiving a salary every month and somehow diverting her attention from family problems. It was simply a dream. But Matteo was only 2 years old, and the local kindergarten accepted children starting at the age of 3. "I'll take care of him, don't worry," reassured her mother-in-law. "You can leave calmly. Everything will be fine." And Valeriana eagerly embraced her new life. There, at work, among people, she felt like she was learning to breathe again. She realized that she was a kind and interesting person, not a witch, an old woman, or a fool. Feeling respected and accepted was so important. Moreover, money started coming into the family. It wasn't much, but it was still better than nothing. However, at one point, Sancho took his wife's advance payment, a crisp stack of bills, disappeared into the night, and didn't return for several days. He probably spent it drinking with his numerous friends. Valeriana cried a lot then. She had planned to use that money to buy winter clothes for Matteo. But then she gathered herself and decided not to repeat her mistakes. Since then, she has carefully hidden her money. Sometimes, while searching for his wife's salary, Sancho would turn the entire room upside down, shouting at Valeriana, threatening her. Matteo would get scared and cry loudly in his crib. Valeriana's heart tore apart from helplessness, fear, and pity for her son. Only God knows how long all of this would have continued. Perhaps Valeriana would eventually have resigned herself to such a life, since many husbands in the village were drunkards. Valeriana's colleagues, the cooks, often discussed the antics of their spouses at work and even made jokes about them, but one day, Sancho crossed all possible boundaries. It happened on a dark December evening. At that time, Matteo was already attending kindergarten. Valeriana picked up her son on her way home from work and prepared dinner. Sancho wasn't at home. He could appear at any moment, in a couple of minutes, late at night, or by morning. This always made Valeriana worry. What if someone else barged into the house with them at night while she and her son were sleeping? She couldn't get used to this constant anxiety, to living in worry. Sancho came home after dinner, of course, drunk. He saw Matteo's scattered toy bricks on the floor in the living room, and that detail triggered his rage. The house is always a mess. There's no room to even step. Sancho shouted. "Do pigs live here?" Valeriana remained silent, seeing the state her husband was in. Any word from her could only make things worse. Sancho was just waiting for something to latch onto. "You're a bad housewife and a worthless wife," the man continued to vent. "You can't raise a son. You're raising him to be just as filthy as you are." These words came from a man who showed up at home with a jacket covered in a thin layer of dirt. Apparently, Sancho had fallen to the ground a few times on the way. Valeriana remained silent. "Why are you just standing there, you idiot?" The man berated her. "I'll slap that stupid face of yours right now." Valeriana wasn't afraid that her husband would carry out this threat. He often resorted to even more terrifying words, but it turned out that Matteo heard everything and got scared for his mother. The toddler rushed into the room and began hitting his father with his tiny fists. "Don't touch mommy." Valeriana couldn't intervene in time. It seemed like Sancho didn't understand what he was doing. He forcefully pushed the child away with his foot. Matteo flew across the room and collided with the wall. He blinked his eyes fearfully for a couple of seconds, then cried loudly from pain and fear. At that moment, how Valeriana hated Sancho. She rushed to her son, checked him over, and hugged him close. The boy quickly calmed down in his mother's arms. Sancho, seemingly realizing something with his alcohol-clouded mind, fell silent and went into the bedroom, while Valeriana remained sitting on the floor, holding the desperately clinging Matteo. At that very moment, she understood that she couldn't stay with Sancho anymore. Her husband's behavior was becoming increasingly aggressive and unpredictable. Alcohol was gradually erasing the personality of an otherwise decent person. No one knew what he would do next. Valeriana had suffered a lot, but now, when Matteo was put in such danger, the child hit his shoulder. But what if he hits his head or back? The consequences could have been very serious. No, she had no right to risk her child's life and well-being. Valeriana gathered her and Matteo's most essential belongings into a large travel bag and went to her in-law's house. Where else could she go? When Sancho's mother saw her daughter-in-law with her sobbing grandson in her arms at the door, she understood everything. She wailed and hurriedly arranged places to sleep for them. Sancho's father, on the other hand, didn't seem pleased. He grumbled to himself something like, "The falling out of lovers is the renewal of love, and women nowadays have become so capricious." Matteo quickly fell asleep after enjoying his grandmother's delicious pastries. The father-in-law went to the living room to watch TV, and Valeriana stayed in the kitchen with her mother-in-law. "It's tough for you, I can see," said the mother-in-law, looking at Valeriana with compassion. "I know that leaving home means you couldn't stand it anymore." "Yes," sighed Valeriana. "Sancho has become angrier and more aggressive." "I see. It hurts me too. After all, he's my only son. Sancho doesn't listen to my pleas or his father's. He doesn't see any problem with his behavior. We must have missed something in his upbringing. Forgive us if you can." "You're not to blame," Valeriana sighed. "He's already an adult." "Then how? How do you plan to live? Maybe we should take you to your parents' place tomorrow, far away from this monster. I'm ashamed to look your parents in the eye, but your and Matteo's well-being is more important." "I can't go to my parents," the woman shook her head. They blame me for everything. They say that once I get married, I should suffer and improve my relationship with my husband." "Oh, these old-fashioned norms," the mother-in-law sighed. "You can't stay here either. Sancho will start coming here and driving you both crazy. It's too close. But I have one idea. Listen, I have something on my mind." The mother-in-law had a longtime friend, Laura. They had worked together on a farm their whole lives, and then they both retired almost simultaneously, only Laura needed money at that time. Her daughter divorced her husband and moved in with her mother and 3 children. So, Laura found a job, and what a job it was. She became a housekeeper in a wealthy mansion. She lived there the whole week and returned home on weekends. The owner, a wealthy businessman, paid her well, especially considering the village's standards. Laura told me that the house needs a cook. The owner is apparently looking for someone right now, and you graduated from culinary college and worked as a cook for so many years. You have the experience. Why not be a candidate for that position? The pay will be good, and they'll provide accommodation. To me, it sounds like a great solution." Valeriana immediately became enthusiastic about the idea. It truly was a wonderful solution, but it was too unbelievable to be true. It seemed unlikely to work out. The very next day, Valeriana went for an interview with the potential employer. Her father-in-law personally drove her to the place in his old, creaky car. Upon entering the property, Valeriana was overwhelmed. It was a whole estate. In the center stood a large, beautiful white stone cottage with towers, walkways, and huge windows. The structure more closely resembled a castle. In front of the house, there was a spacious lawn with gazebos and a swimming pool. As it was December, the pool was obviously empty. A little further away, a small village of one-story houses could be seen. The stern woman who let Valeriana in, dressed in a tightly fastened coat, explained that the staff lived there. Valeriana was escorted to the kitchen, where she had to demonstrate her skills. The person conducting the examination was Elisa Santos herself. As it turned out, she used to work in the house as the head chef. The potential boss was pleased with Valeriana's culinary abilities. Most likely, we'll choose you for this position, she smiled. Wait for us to call. They will definitely call back. The rest of the day, Valeriana couldn't contain her excitement. She had fallen in love with the place. She really wanted to live and work there. It was such a fantastic opportunity. She could have a job, accommodation, and the chance to always be with Mateo. It seemed like a solution to all her problems. She just hoped it would work out. And it did. In the evening, Elisa called Valeriana and told her that she had been hired and that they expected her at work the next day. Valeriana seemed to squeal with joy. Her mother-in-law smiled at her reaction, and her father-in-law mumbled something under his breath as usual. But it was clear that he was very happy that everything had worked out so well. And so, a completely different life began for Valeriana. The next day, Elisa greeted her again, but this time, she didn't look as strict and angry as she did yesterday. The woman smiled and winked at Mateo, then took one of Valeriana's bags and led the newcomers to a small, cozy house. Here you'll be living, Elisa announced. Settle in for now. At 12 o'clock, I'll meet you in the kitchen. You'll get to know the other assistants and learn about your duties. It was such a wonderful house. It had 2 rooms, a small kitchen, a bathroom with a shower cabin, simple but stylish furniture, a TV, and a refrigerator, everything needed for a happy, peaceful life. Valeriana immediately felt that she would be happy there. And indeed, she quickly made friends with the other assistants and, of course, got acquainted with the owners. Nicanor was the head of the household. He was a man around 40, fit, athletic, and always busy. Even during lunch, he was busy with reports on his laptop or taking important calls. Nicanor was the head of a large tourism business, and to make it work properly, he had to work hard. His wife, Agata, was a typical socialite. She woke up closer to noon, dressed up, put on makeup, and drove away in her beautiful car to the city, not far from the upscale cottage community. There, she met her friends, went shopping, then to the fitness center, and attended psychological training. In short, Agata lived for her pleasure and periodically staged demonstrative performances for her always busy husband, reproaching him for not paying enough attention to her. Valeriana felt sorry for Nicanor during those moments. How could this spoiled princess not understand that she could lead such a carefree life only because her husband constantly worked? Nicanor and Agata had a daughter, Melania. When Valeriana arrived at the house, the girl had just turned 15. She was a typical representative of the so-called golden youth, arrogant, capricious, spoiled, and used to having all her wishes granted as if by magic. Nicanor rarely interacted with the assistants, he simply didn't have time. He often had to travel to other cities and countries for business, but he was always remarkably polite with each of his subordinates, knew them all by name, didn't skimp on salaries and bonuses, and sincerely thanked them for their high-quality work. This earned him respect. However, Valeriana often noticed that there was something sad in Nicanor's eyes. There was something painful in his life. Some kind of sorrow. What a pity it was. He seemed like such a good person. Thanks to Elisa's persuasion, Valeriana got her driver's license because the cottage community was quite far from the city, and she had to go there almost every day for errands. So, Valeriana had to take the wheel. She quickly realized all the advantages of being a lady driver. Now she could personally take Mateo to a nice city kindergarten in the mornings, and on weekends, she and her son would visit her mother-in-law. She was always happy to see them and treated her guests to delicious pastries. As for Sancho, over the past couple of years, he has completely descended into alcoholism. His parents had sent him to the hospital several times, where they managed to revive and rehabilitate him, but each time he returned to the village, he would rush back to his friends. One night, during yet another drinking spree, a fire broke out in Sancho's house. It later turned out that one of the guests fell asleep on the couch with a lit cigarette. The house burned down completely, and several people lost their lives. Sancho managed to survive, but spent several months in the hospital with burns and returned to his parents' home, seeking shelter. Where else could he go? Unfortunately, the tragic event didn't teach him anything. He went back to his old ways. Sancho had no intention of getting a job and sincerely believed that his elderly parents were obligated to support him. After all, they both received good pensions. "So, you left him in time," Valeriana's mother-in-law often said, wiping away a few tears from her eyes. Valeriana felt sorry for the kind woman. She perfectly understood the pain in her heart for her son. Valeriana let out a sad sigh, reminiscing about her ex-husband, but she needed to hurry to the store. She got into her car, played her favorite album, stepped on the gas, and drove to the city. The roads were almost empty now, as rush hour had long passed. It was getting dark, and the rain was becoming heavier. Valeriana turned the wipers to their highest speed. Indeed, the weather had really deteriorated. Fortunately, tomorrow was a day off, so she wouldn't have to take Mateo to school in the morning. Valeriana smiled. Finally, her first grader would get some rest after the week's hard work. Adapting to his new status was not easy for Mateo. Valeriana parked her car in the spacious parking lot of her favorite shopping center. There were so many interesting shops here. She needed to stop by the grocery store, then the bakery, and maybe even the toy department. Mateo deserved a treat. He had been studying so hard all week. Half an hour later, Valeriana emerged from the shopping center, happy and laden with bags of purchases. She was looking forward to seeing how excited Mateo would be to unpack those bags when she got back home. She didn't feel like leaving the warm shopping center for the cold, rainy October evening. She still had to run to her car in the icy downpour. Her car was quite far from the exit. Valeriana sighed, opened her umbrella, and walked quickly through the parking lot. The parking lot was nearly empty now, and that's when she noticed it, a tiny figure huddled near the trash bins. A small, defenseless, touching silhouette. It was a child. What was the child doing here all alone? There were no adults in sight. Valeriana struggled with herself for a moment. On the one hand, there was her car right nearby. She could just get in, drive away, and return to her familiar, well-arranged, and comfortable life. Mateo must have been waiting for her, sitting by the dark window, hoping to see the car's headlights approaching along the driveway soon. Why would Valeriana want any extra problems, troubles, or adventures? Perhaps the girl's parents were nearby and would come for her. There was nothing extraordinary. And yet, how could she just pass by? If she were completely honest with herself, there were no adults in sight, and the girl near the trash bins did not look like an ordinary child. She seemed to be poorly dressed, at least without a hat. Even from a distance, it was evident from her silhouette. And what would an ordinary child be doing in such weather near the garbage bins? Why would they approach the stinking trash? Valeriana sighed and slowly, so as not to scare the girl, moved in her direction. The little one noticed the approaching woman halfway, turned around, and tensed up, but didn't seem to be planning to run away. When Valeriana reached the child, she couldn't help but let out a sigh. Indeed, it was a girl of about 7 to 8 years old, the same age as her son. But she looked so pitiful. She was incredibly skinny, covered in grime, and her long hair was matted and hanging like a mess around her face. It seemed like she hadn't taken a bath in a long time. The girl was wearing a coat, obviously not her own. A gray, dirty down jacket, and it was difficult to determine its original color. She had rolled up the sleeves so that they wouldn't hang down to her knees. Someone probably threw the jacket into the trash, and the girl picked it up. Some of the filling was poking out of holes in the garment. On her feet were rough, worn-out boys' boots that were clearly a few sizes too big. The little waif looked at Valeriana with a mixture of fear and hope but remained silent. Her entire body was tense, as if she were ready to dart away at the slightest sign of danger. "Don't be afraid of me," Valeriana said gently to the girl, trying her best to make her voice sound as soft as possible. "I'm not afraid," the girl said, raising her chin proudly. She clearly wanted to appear braver and stronger than she actually was. "What are you doing here?" "I got hungry. I didn't eat anything in the morning, so I came to the bins." You can always find something delicious here at this time. Valeriana suppressed a sad sigh that was welling up inside her. She felt so sorry for this unfortunate child, forced to rummage through the trash for food. Don't look for anything there, she said. What if I treated you to a pastry instead? Valeriana took out a sugary bun from one of the bags and handed it to the girl. She thanked her, grabbed the treat, and immediately began devouring it with her tiny teeth. The girl finished the bun in a matter of seconds, and at that moment, she resembled a small wild animal. Valeriana had never seen children eat with such greed and speed before. Who do you live with? Valeriana asked the question after the girl wiped her mouth from the crumbs and looked at the adult again, this time not as wary. No one. Alone. By myself. Is it possible? The woman asked. It is, because that's how I live. Listen, what's your name? Christina. Why do you ask? Suspicion flickered in the girl's eyes again. What a beautiful name. Nothing, I just wanted to get to know you. Well, then you should introduce yourself too, the little girl said quite maturely. She spoke well and behaved fairly politely and confidently. This girl didn't resemble a child who grew up on the streets or in a family of outcasts. Something didn't add up here. My name is Valeriana, the woman said. So, now we're acquainted. Are you feeling cold? A little, the girl admitted, shivering and shrugging her shoulders. But now, at least, I'm not hungry, and I can go back to the basement. It's quite warm there, next to the hot water pipe. I'll warm up quickly. You live in the basement? Alone? Aren't you scared? Valeriana tried to hold back, but questions poured out of her like a flood. What's there to be scared of? Yes, I live in the basement. There are some buildings behind the shopping center where they keep various boxes. And there's a good basement in one of those buildings. They never lock it because the lock is broken. That's where I live. It's all right there. Always dry, quiet, dark, and warm because of the hot water pipe. And how long have you been there? Since summer. That's when I left home. Or rather, not home, but my father. The girl cut herself off, realizing that she had become too candid with a stranger, and that could be dangerous. A child forced to live on the streets usually doesn't trust adults. You never know what's on their mind. Don't be afraid. I really want to help you. Valeriana gently touched Christina's shoulder. Why do I need your help? The girl bravely spoke up. I'm perfectly fine. Nevertheless, maybe you'd like to come to my place as a guest. Valeriana suddenly blurted out. You can warm up, have a proper dinner, and take a warm bath. We'll find clothes that fit you. And I have a son, a little boy just like you. He has so many toys. You two could play together, and then, if you don't like it, I promise to bring you back here. Christina looked at the woman with uncertainty. It was evident that Valeriana's description of the prospects intrigued the girl, but she was afraid. It was clearly written on her serious, pale face. I won't do anything bad to you, promised Valeriana, gently patting Christina on her fragile shoulder. The woman couldn't just leave Christina here, next to the garbage bins, in the darkness and cold. Okay, Christina finally squeezed out. But only if I tell you to take me back immediately. Do you swear? I swear, Valeriana smiled. She was confident that Christina would hardly want to leave her cozy home. Valeriana opened the back door of the car and settled the little girl in Mateo's child seat. She would have to thoroughly clean the seat later, as Christina's clothing was very dirty. Valeriana would throw it in the trash bin in the yard as soon as the girl was in the bath. About halfway through the journey, Christina sat quietly, looking out of the window. Valeriana didn't ask her any extra questions. She feared that Christina might get scared and demand to be taken back, but the girl started speaking on her own. When Mama was here, we lived very well, she said. We used to go on errands in a car like this, but only in a taxi. Valeriana's heart was once again filled with sympathy for the unfortunate child. There was so much bitterness and sorrow in Christina's words when Mama was here. It seemed that Christina's mother was not with her anymore. It was logical, because if she were alive, the girl wouldn't be searching for dinner in the trash bin. What happened to your mom? Where is she now? Valeriana asked. She disappeared, Christina sighed bitterly. Maybe she got lost somewhere or is in the hospital. I don't know. I woke up in the morning and she was gone. Dad was drunk and sleeping, and Mama was gone. They had a big fight in the evening, Mom and Dad. I thought maybe she just left to avoid listening to him and would come back soon. It had happened before. I wasn't worried then. But Mom didn't come back for a day, a week, or a month. And it's hard to live with Dad, the girl continued, sharing her sorrows. He's mean. He yells and screams, and sometimes he even hits me. Maybe Mom ran away because of that, but why didn't she take me with her? Valeriana swallowed the unpleasant lump in her throat and forced back the tears welling up in her eyes. Well, the story was strange and sad, but right now Christina needed a reliable helper, not a sobbing mess. And Mom, Valeriana asked, did she ever hit you? No, no way. The girl exclaimed. Mama, you know, she was kind. Mama bought me delicious food and beautiful clothes, she used to buy. She always smiled at me. We played together, did reading and math. Well, sometimes she, like Dad, would drink, but she never hit me or scolded me. She just went to bed, and that was it. But Dad, he's mean, not nice. Christina kept on telling her life story. Valeriana shuddered as she listened to the girl's revelations. The woman deliberately chose a longer route to let the girl pour her heart out. Valeriana needed to learn as much as possible about the little girl's fate to know how to help her. From Christina's narrative, Valeriana understood that she lived with a troubled family in a small apartment somewhere on the outskirts of the city. She had both a mother and a father, both of whom drank. Only the mother treated Christina with tenderness, despite her lifestyle. But the father seemed to be genuinely angry and aggressive. He would have fits of rage, throwing things around the apartment, threatening, and even hitting Christina's mother. The girl recounted several such episodes. The unfortunate woman seemed to consider all this normal, or perhaps she was afraid of her husband. Maybe she had nowhere else to go and just endured it all. But both parents agreed on one thing: they both loved to drink. Their honest company would often gather in their kitchen until early morning, drinking, making noise, and sometimes even fighting. And in such an environment, little Christina grew up. However, she did not consider herself unhappy. Well, she wouldn't. The girl didn't know any other life, and she had a loving mother by her side who cared for her, bought her clothes and cheap chocolates, frequently hugged her, and never scolded her. It was evident that this woman truly loved Christina. She even tried to educate her, apparently during rare sober periods, teaching her letters and numbers, telling her about the world, and reading fairy tales to her. It was strange that she left Christina and disappeared somewhere. Based on what the girl said about her, she treasured her daughter and would hardly abandon her without a serious reason. Perhaps something happened to that woman? Maybe she ended up in prison or something even worse. When Mom left, things got really bad. Dad would constantly yell at me, hit me, and not give me any food, even though he had meals himself. His friends would come over. They would drink, pass out. Then I would leave the room and finish what was left on their table, Christina said. Valeriana felt chills running down her spine from the vivid images forming in her mind. A little hungry girl rummaging through their table to find something edible. What about your grandparents? Valeriana asked. Do you have any other relatives? No, Christina shook her head. Only Mom and Dad. Mom is good, but Christina was afraid of her father, that was evident. When she spoke about him, she involuntarily shrank, becoming even smaller and more vulnerable. It seemed that he treated her terribly. His eyes were so angry. Sometimes they were normal, but other times it was like he turned into someone else. I was really scared of him then, the girl reminisced. I would hide when he got that angry. Sometimes I would sit under the bed all night while he was looking for me, yelling, breaking dishes, and scolding Mom. When his friends came over, Dad would be drunk, but he'd become different, even kind. I liked it when they came. Sometimes someone would even give me candy. But living with her father became increasingly dangerous. He would lose control too often, and then chairs, dishes, and other things would fly across the rooms. Once, in such a state, the man grabbed Christina by the throat. It hurt, and I couldn't even call for help, the girl calmly recounted. Valeriana was so overwhelmed by the painful truth that she parked the car on the side of the road. She couldn't drive in such a state. I was so scared. I looked at my father, and his eyes were so angry. It was useless to ask for help or cry. I tried to kick him, but Christina couldn't do anything. She was too small and weak. The girl ran out of breath, her vision darkened, and then salvation came from a completely unexpected source. There was a loud knock on the door. The doorbell hadn't worked for a long time, so anyone who needed to get into the apartment would simply pound on the door with their fists or feet. Her father stopped, blinked his eyes a couple of times as if coming back to himself. Christina noticed that the man's eyes gradually returned to normal. He looked at his daughter with bewilderment, shook his head cautiously, gently placed the girl on the floor, and went to open the door. At that moment, the neighbor saved Christina. He came to her father with a bottle to spend another evening in his company. Rodrigo had no idea that his visit prevented a tragedy. The men settled in the kitchen. Soon, a few more people joined them. Everything was as usual, the steady hum of voices, the clinking of glasses, laughter. However, for Christina, now she didn't feel safe. The girl realized that sooner or later the guests would leave, and she would be left alone with that monster again. Who knew, perhaps it would return again. Christina didn't want to wait for that moment. She quickly packed what she considered essential into her backpack, the doll her mother gave her, a drawing notebook, a bottle of water, and a half-empty bag of cookies. She put on a sports suit that Dora, the neighbor, gave her when her daughter outgrew it. She took one last look around the room and silently slipped out of the apartment into the warm June night. Christina didn't know where to go or what to do next, but she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't go back to her father's apartment. She needed to find a safe place to wait until her mother returned, and she was sure her mother would come back. Mom couldn't have left Christina forever. Mom loved her so much. Outside, it was warm, quiet, and beautiful. The bright stars shone in the sky. The girl walked along the sidewalk, humming a little tune and smiling. She felt light and calm in her heart. Christina realized that she wouldn't be able to sleep in that apartment, always listening for every sound and fearing her father, who could snatch her up or throw her against the wall at any moment. No, it was better to be homeless than endure that. However, soon enough, Christina found out that living on the streets was not pleasant either. Firstly, sleeping under the open sky was cold. Secondly, it was unclear where to find food. And thirdly, there were dangers here too: mean people, big dogs, and speeding cars. Who knew what else? However, it only took Christina a couple of days to figure everything out. That same night, when she left, she stumbled upon the basement on the premises of a large shopping center. There couldn't be a better place to weather difficult times. It was quiet, warm, and safe. Admittedly, it was very dark, but Christina quickly adapted to it. She discovered a flashlight near the garbage bins. When she wanted to draw or see something clearly, she would simply turn it on and hang it on a pipe. It actually made the place feel cozy. In the trash bins, Christina could find everything she needed. There, she found a mattress for her makeshift bed and an old blanket. Every day, she would also find food in those bins. The shopping center had many cafes and restaurants, so discarded food with just expired dates often ended up in the dumpsters. It was delicious and suitable for consumption. Of course, it wasn't always available. Sometimes Christina would find nothing because she wasn't the only one scavenging around the bins. She had seen many adult homeless people inspecting the containers. They came from somewhere far away. Christina was afraid of them. As long as those people were around, she wouldn't come out of her hiding place. She was generally afraid of adults because, well, one never knew what they might be thinking. However, she believed she could distinguish between good and bad people. Some are definitely good, like you. I don't run away from people like you. They feel sorry for me, offer me something delicious to eat, but others. There are some who want to harm me. I can see it right away. Once, a man noticed me. He seemed kind, but I knew better. He approached me, promised cakes, candies, and beautiful dolls, and he smiled in such a disgusting way. When I tried to back away, he grabbed me and dragged me towards his car. It hurt, and I was so scared, Christina recounted. Christina bit him, clenching her teeth as hard as she could into the hand that held her shoulder. The man screamed, and for a moment, he let go of the girl. That was all Christina needed. She ran away from the dangerous stranger with all her might. He chased her at first, but then he fell behind. Valeriana looked at the fragile and defenseless girl. With such a child on the streets, anything could happen. She couldn't let her stay alone under any circumstances. I learned how to understand people, the girl proudly stated. And I learned how to live on my own. I won't disappear. But doesn't your father look for you? You disappeared, after all. He doesn't know where you are or what happened to you. They must be looking for you, Valeriana asked. I don't know, Christina shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. Most likely, my father is just happy that I'm gone. I think he hates me. Only my mother loved me, and I loved her too. When Christina mentioned her mother, her eyes filled with tears. It was evident that she missed her suddenly missing parent very much. Sometimes I go to our yard, climb up high on a tree with thick branches. Nobody sees me up there, but I can see everything very well. I keep an eye on our entrance, hoping to see my mother. I'm patient, I can sit there all day. The main thing is to have enough food. I see my father. He walks back and forth, sometimes drunk, sometimes not. But my mother hasn't returned yet. Although I haven't been there for a long time. Maybe something has changed. I'll stay overnight at your place, and the next day, I'll go back to the house and check, Christina said. We'll go together, Valeriana promised. I'll talk to your father and... No, please don't. It was evident that the girl was panicking. He will hurt you and me too. I can't show myself to him, please don't give me to him. It's okay, Valeriana hugged the frightened child tightly, trying to calm her down. Of course, I won't give you to him. He's a monster. I'll go alone, without you, with the police. We need to find out what happened to your mother once and for all. Can you really do that? The little girl's eyes sparkled with hope. Of course. Don't worry about anything. We will go home now. You'll have dinner with us, play with my son and his toys, and then go to sleep in a clean, warm bed. Everything will be fine now. I promise. Valeriana eagerly wanted to help little Christina. The girl had endured so many trials. She needed a lot of love and care to overcome the consequences of the trauma. If necessary, Valeriana would adopt her and raise her as her own daughter, but she wouldn't let her stay on the streets, let alone go back to her abnormal father. Valeriana got behind the wheel. The rest of the way, the girl and the woman remained in complete silence. Christina was clearly exhausted and dozed off, snuggling up to the warm seat at the back. Valeriana, on the other hand, pondered what she had heard and feverishly thought about what to do next. Of course, the right thing to do would be to take Christina to the police, but imagining the girl inside those cold bureaucratic walls, surrounded by indifferent and stern people in uniforms, was difficult. Christina seemed so lost and hungry. Right now, she needed comfort, warmth, care, and a delicious dinner. The police could be involved tomorrow. Mateo rushed into the hallway to meet his mother when they arrived home. Finally, he exclaimed joyfully, "I've been waiting for you so long." "Oh, who's this?" The boy's eyes widened as he looked at the little wanderer. Christina immediately became shy, hiding behind Valeriana. "This is Christina," the woman said, introducing her guest. "She's staying with us tonight. And this is Mateo, my son. Remember, I told you about him?" "Cool." Mateo finally regained his composure. "Christina, come to my room quickly. Do you like building blocks? I've built a whole city there. Let's play." Christina needs to take a bath, change her clothes, and eat first. Valeriana shook her head. "And then, if she doesn't get tired, she can play with you." "I'll definitely play with her," the little girl promised. "I love playing with building blocks too." Valeriana prepared a warm bath with foam for the girl and helped her wash her hair. It turned out Christina had beautiful light brown hair. After the bath, the transformation was astonishing. Christina turned into a real beauty, big turquoise eyes, long eyelashes, and well-defined facial features. She looked like a girl from a postcard. Valeriana admired the little girl. About an hour later, Christina, washed, fed, and dressed in pajamas, was busy playing on the floor with building blocks while Mateo joined her, helping her build a castle from the colorful little bricks. The children quickly found common ground. Valeriana was sitting in her armchair, reading a fairy tale to the children. It was such a cozy, natural, and perfect sight. She felt like these two kids had always lived in her home. Christina subtly reminded Valeriana of someone. The arched eyebrows, eye color, and defined cheekbones, a face with such fine features, it seemed that Valeriana had seen it somewhere before. Maybe the little girl resembled an actress or a girl from an advertisement. Valeriana allowed the children to play until almost 11 p.m. It was late, but it was a day off tomorrow, so they could sleep in until noon. Then, Valeriana tucked the sleepy little ones into Mateo in his bed and Christina on the sofa in the living room. "It's so nice to be here," the drowsy girl whispered, lying on a soft pillow under a warm blanket. "I'm so scared. What if this is just a dream? I'll open my eyes and find myself in the basement again." "Don't be afraid. It's not a dream. I promised you that everything would be fine. So it will." Christina smiled and peacefully fell asleep, while Valeriana continued to gaze worriedly at the sleeping girl's face. It was hard to comprehend how she managed to survive on the streets for so long and still appear quite healthy and normal at first glance. When Valeriana woke up the next morning, the first thing she did was prepare pancake batter. She wanted to treat the children to a delicious breakfast. The little ones were still sound asleep. They were tired from all the excitement the previous evening. Waiting until 10 a.m., when it was no longer too early to call, Valeriana dialed Elisa's number, her immediate boss. Who else could she turn to in this difficult situation if not this wise woman? She would surely help find a way out. In a few words, Valeriana told her about what had happened the previous day. "Are you out of your mind?" Elisa exclaimed in horror. "You should have taken her to the police right away. This is almost kidnapping." "Who knows, maybe the father has reported her missing." "I couldn't take her to the police yesterday. It was impossible." "Come over, see for yourself." Elisa rushed over within 10 minutes, still in her pajamas with a coat thrown over them. By that time, Christina and Mateo had already woken up. "Meet Christina," Valeriana said, hugging the little girl affectionately. "Well, hello there, beautiful." Elisa couldn't help but smile. "Hello." While the children were enjoying pancakes with sour cream in the kitchen, the adults were discussing what to do next in the living room. "There's no need to think, we have to go to the police station as soon as possible," advised Elisa. "Otherwise, there might be serious problems." "But what if they take her away and send her to an orphanage or, worse, give her back to that insane father?" "I promised the girl that everything would be fine. We can explain everything, what happened and why." He's seemingly a kind, understanding, and influential person, you know. So if anyone can help, it's only him. You're probably right, that might be the best option. But how do we approach him? I'm even scared to start that conversation. Well, in this case, I'll help you, I'll talk to him myself. Thank you. Valeriana felt a genuine sense of relief. Nicanor would surely come up with something. Perhaps he'd find the girl's mother or help with her adoption. Valeriana promised to meet with Nicanor before noon. She hurriedly started cleaning up. Important people like him didn't visit her small house often. Christina brightened up. She enjoyed playing with Matteo, watching cartoons, and drawing to behaving like any ordinary child, as if she hadn't been rummaging through trash bins for food yesterday, as if she hadn't been surviving on the streets for several months. The girl sometimes ran up to Valeriana, looked at her with happy eyes, and hugged her tightly around the waist. She didn't say anything, but words weren't needed. Christina was grateful to Valeriana for taking her in. The little girl was delighted with the clean and warm home, beautiful clothes, delicious food, and toys, and probably didn't want to think about her dark basement anymore. Nicanor, as Elisa promised, arrived after breakfast. Well, show me your little wanderer, he smiled. Right away, Elisa hurriedly called the girl. Christina, come here. There are people who want to see you. The girl immediately came at the call, slightly out of breath and disheveled, with a bright blush on her cheeks. She and Matteo were playing tag. The boy looked a bit puzzled when he saw Nicanor. The man, without taking his eyes off the girl, watched her closely, and she, in turn, scrutinized him. And then, it was only at that moment that Valeriana finally realized who Christina resembled so much. Of course, Nicanor. The same big turquoise eyes, chestnut hair, cheekbones, nose, and lips. Christina looked much more like him than his own daughter, Melania, did. It was simply astonishing. Elisa also noticed the resemblance. I can't help but notice, is it just me or? We do seem to look very similar, the man cautiously remarked, squatting down to be at eye level with the little girl. You look like my mommy. She's so beautiful, just like you. This is unbelievable, Valeriana sighed. How is this possible? Well, life is full of surprises, Nicanor grinned. You kids go and play for a while, and we'll sit here and think about how to handle this. The adults sat together in the living room, Nicanor, Valeriana, and Elisa. Valeriana recounted in the smallest detail how she found Christina yesterday and retold her story. Nicanor listened without interrupting, catching every word, asking questions. His eyes. Valeriana felt like she saw hope and joy in them. Christina made a strong impression on him. Perhaps, first and foremost, because of the incredible resemblance. Could it be possible that the girl was his illegitimate daughter? Unlikely. Apparently, Christina's mother wasn't a very fortunate woman. If Nicanor decided to have an affair, he would surely choose a more suitable candidate for such a role. Then what was it all about? I'm not sure, Nicanor said, but it seems to me that this girl and I are relatives. Such a resemblance simply can't be a coincidence. Do you have any unknown relatives, Elisa asked, who might live, you know, like this, drinking, neglecting a child, and so on? Yes, Nicanor nodded. I have a sister who... Well, it's a long and very sad story. I try not to think about it, but this girl, she didn't appear here by chance. Valeriana didn't think the owner would share such details of his life, but Nicanor still told the incredible story of his immediate family. It was hard to believe what she heard. It all seemed like a movie or a book. Can such things really happen in life? Nicanor was born from his mother Luciana's second marriage, the first for his father, successful businessman Jorge. Luciana's first husband turned out to be a bad person. He abused his wife, took everything from the house, caused scandals, and didn't work. Of course, initially, the man behaved quite differently, restrained, trying to please his young wife. But as time went on, his true nature gradually emerged. Luciana, Nicanor's mother, realized that she needed to escape from such a husband, but it was already too late. In the family, their daughter Alba was growing up. The spouses lived in the husband's apartment, which he inherited from his grandmother. Luciana didn't have her own place to go, so she endured. She had nowhere else to turn. All her relatives lived far away in the village. Her salary was small, and she had a child to take care of. Where could she go with such baggage? But then, one day at work, Luciana met Jorge. A handsome, successful man, surprisingly interested in her, the weary woman, not as a talented employee. He openly courted her and invited her on dates. Luciana decided to give it a try. Why not? She hadn't felt desired and loved for so long, and Jorge was such a wonderful man, handsome, kind, intelligent, and successful. Next to him, all the problems seemed like nothing. Jorge, of course, found out that Luciana was married and had a daughter. It didn't bother him at all. He proposed that his beloved divorce her husband, who was dragging the whole family down, and become his wife. It was just like a fairy tale. Of course, Luciana happily agreed. Luciana and her daughter moved into Jorge's suburban cottage. Soon the couple had a common child, Nicanor. At that time, Alba was 11 years old, entering adolescence, and the changes overwhelmed her. Perhaps becoming the older sister made her feel unnecessary, or maybe the genes of her biological father took over. Either way, Alba turned from a sweet, obedient girl into a rebellious teenager. Alba started skipping school, drinking, smoking, and going to clubs. Luciana and Jorge now often leave their little Nicanor in the care of a nanny and travel around the city in search of their daughter. The girl resisted their efforts. She had new, strange friends, mostly older than her. She completely neglected her studies and responded sharply and rudely to any advice from her parents, if she even bothered to pay attention to them. Luciana and Jorge struggled to help their daughter. They sent her to clinics, then to an expensive, comfortable boarding school for troubled teens. Nothing helped. But Alba loved her younger brother, Nicanor. It seemed he was the only relative who evoked warm feelings in her. The girl often played with the little boy, bought him something interesting, protected him from the nanny's scolding, and sneakily gave him chocolates and pastries. In general, she tried to make Nicanor's life happier and more joyful. And the little boy, even though he was very young at the time, saw this affection from his sister and cherished it. He loved Alba with all his heart, and he was scared when the adults said that his sister was spiraling into darkness and would soon end up badly. The parents tried to limit Alba's access to money. No money, no means to buy alcohol, automatically distancing dubious friends, freeloaders. But it didn't help because Alba started getting involved in shady business. Once, she was caught with her friend stealing. The friends decided to loot a kiosk at night. Of course, they got caught, and they were taken to the police station. Thanks to Jorge's connections, Alba was saved, but he yelled at her so loudly that the windows in the house were shaking. At that moment, Nicanor, who was just 5 years old, felt sorry for his sister. As soon as their father calmed down, the little boy sneaked into Alba's room and silently hugged her. She tousled his hair and smiled. "Nobody here needs me," Alba sighed. "Jorge is not my real father, and my mother. She thinks I'm too much like my biological father, and that's why she doesn't love me." "But I love you," the little boy said. He hugged his sister tightly. "I love you too," she smiled. "You and no one else." Later, Alba got caught stealing again. This time, Jorge was adamant about not saving his stepdaughter. Surprisingly, Luciana agreed with her husband. She believed it was high time to teach her daughter a serious lesson. Alba had to spend a year and a half in juvenile detention. There, she met people who taught her that there were many ways to make money in the world. Learning and working honestly for someone else were not necessary at all. When Alba was released, Nicanor was already in the first grade. She looked like a grown, unfamiliar young woman, thin, pale, and somehow very different. "We always looked very similar," Nicanor recalled, "but then I couldn't recognize her." There was something predatory about her appearance. At first, Alba behaved decently. Her parents breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that a year and a half in detention had made an impact on her. The young woman had matured, understood a lot, and seemed to have buckled down. They left for a business trip, leaving the grown-up Nicanor in the care of his sister. But when they unexpectedly returned, they found a crowd of unfamiliar, disreputable-looking people in their home. Smoke filled the air. Guests were smoking right in the rooms. There were cigarette butts and empty bottles everywhere. Loud music blared from the speakers. The sight of little Nicanor, kicking a crushed beer can, finally drove Jorge over the edge. He dispersed the crowd of guests and yelled at Alba for a very long time. She was standing before him, looking innocent. "Why can't I invite my friends here? After all, I live here too." Nicanor couldn't understand why his sister was deliberately provoking their father. Didn't she realize it only made things worse? The little boy felt that the sight of their enraged, poorly controlled father brought joy to his sister. Jorge kicked Alba out. He told her to clean up her act and that her feet shouldn't be in that house. However, he didn't leave her on the street. He bought her an apartment somewhere on the outskirts of the city. "You are already an adult. So, you should live independently. Find a job, get married. Do whatever you want, but not here." The mother supported her husband in this decision, and Alba left. It seemed to Nicanor that the adults felt relieved by this, but for him, he really missed his sister. He was attached to her. Without her, a melancholic emptiness filled his little heart. Since then, Jorge stopped communicating with Alba altogether. Luciana, on the other hand, sometimes visited her daughter either in person or over the phone. Jorge categorically forbade his wife from giving Alba any money, but she secretly transferred sums to her daughter's account. Nicanor knew about it, for sure. Talking about Alba in the house was prohibited. Not that anyone formulated the ban explicitly. It just happened that way. However, sometimes the parents discussed Alba's life when they thought their son was asleep and couldn't hear them. Nicanor eagerly caught every word. He was curious to learn about his sister's life. Alba ended up in prison several times. Later, she seemed to get married and have a child. It appeared the boy was sick and died shortly after. After that, the discussions about Alba ceased. When Nicanor once asked his mother where his sister had gone, she evasively replied that Alba had moved to another city and didn't want to have any contact with them. Time went on, and Nicanor often thought about Alba but knew nothing about her life. "And then this little girl suddenly," the man said thoughtfully, glancing through the open door of the children's room at Christina. He and Mateo were building a pillow and blanket fort. "I am just sure she has some connection to Alba. The little girl is a spitting image of me and my sister. She even has the same birthmark on her cheek as me and Alba," Nicanor said. "It sounds like a fairy tale," Valeriana said, shaking her head. "Perhaps," Elisa agreed, "but you know what life is like. It's filled with such interesting stories sometimes." "I must find out everything," Nicanor declared. "I'll call the police right away and get all the information about the little girl's parents. I have acquaintances there, so they'll provide me with the information quickly. Valeriana, watch over Christina. Can you do that?" With pleasure, the woman smiled. Nicanor returned to Valeriana's house in the evening, looking both tired and excited. "Did you find out anything?" Valeriana asked. "Did you find your sister?" "I found her, but it was too late," Nicanor lowered his head sadly. "Alba is no longer alive. But Christina, her daughter, is still here. I'll raise her, give her the best of everything. I couldn't save my sister, but at least I'll help my niece find her place in life." Nicanor quickly found out through his police contacts that Christina was listed as a missing person. In fact, it was not Christina herself who was missing but her body, as nobody believed she was alive. Christina's father was an alcoholic with a history of serious illnesses. Drinking made him aggressive and uncontrollable. Over time, his condition worsened, and one day, In a state of altered consciousness, he killed his wife, Alba. Luckily, Christina was sound asleep at that moment and saw nothing. When he regained his senses, he realized what he had done, assessed the consequences he would face, and panicked. He put his wife's body in a large trash bag and dumped it in the woods, where he buried it. The next morning, he told everyone that Alba had run away with some admirer, a version that didn't raise any doubts since Alba was known to be a drinking woman capable of erratic behavior. However, when Christina also went missing, the police became seriously interested in the man's actions. They conducted an investigation and discovered the truth about what had really happened to Alba. Since then, no one doubted that the man had also done something to his daughter, although he vehemently denied it. Meanwhile, Christina survived as best she could on the streets, waiting for her mother to return. She was the only one who believed that her mother would come back. How do we tell her about this? Valeriana covered her mouth with her hand, trying to suppress the rising sobs. What a horrifying and incredible story. I don't know. Perhaps, for now, we shouldn't tell her the details. Later, I'll hire the best child psychologists, and we'll find a gentle way to break the news to her. But it will still be difficult, very difficult, Nicanor replied. And Alba, why didn't she try to meet you? She knew you were in this city. I don't know. She was always very proud. Maybe she thought that my parents had turned me against her, and I waited for her so much when I was a child and a teenager. I missed her so much. They told me she wasn't in this city, that she didn't want to have any contact with us, and I believed them, but I could have saved her. Valeriana placed her hand on Nicanor's shoulder. It was a simple, reassuring gesture. It was the first time she had seen him like this, bewildered, sad, and pale. None of his usual calm and composure remained. Maybe we should invite Christina? Valeriana suggested. You should meet her, get to know each other better. She's such a wonderful girl. She is kind, smart, and probably very resilient, as she has survived on the streets. Yes. Maybe that's the right thing to do, Nicanor nodded. We need to meet her. Valeriana smiled and went to the children's room. She was certain that little Christina would heal her uncle's emotional wounds, and he would become her protector, support for life. Everything would be all right, just as Valeriana had promised the girl.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.